A couple of months back, I was invited to go do something that I hadn't really done since I was about 16. I was invited by Brian and Brendan to go fishing. I grew up with a hunting and fishing dad where I learned to loathe those two sports. But I thought having an opportunity to be with two friends who I love to death would be this beautiful chance, and to do it around a beautiful Stanislaus, I think that's how you say it, river here in California. Is that right? Stanislaus, excuse me. It's close. So at the end of that first day of fishing, by the way, I caught the first fish, and then no more after that. It was great. But at the end of that day, it was headed towards sunset, and we were like, let's go to one more place. And so we take a hike up this kind of cavernous road that as you enter the road, it has a sign that shows a Jeep and off-roading vehicle saying you're permitted to go off-roading here. And it was built for it. There were deep caverns that you could drive your truck on, but made it hard to walk the 1.5 miles, 2 miles into the area where we climbed down the hill and sat beside the Stanislaus River and fished for like another hour and a half. And it was quiet, and it was peaceful, and it was beautiful. And we watched the sun set, and then in that space between sunset and darkness, we decided it might be smart to take a walk back the 2 miles to our car. And so we headed up the hill and started walking down that road. And as we were walking down the road, that light began to change. And it got darker and darker. And the road got harder and harder to walk. And I had just walked it an hour before, but now the road looked and felt radically different because the light had changed. So I did what any good millennial-ish person would do. I pulled out my phone and I turned on my flashlight. Now, this is a great invention, not the flashlight, the iPhone. No, both, they're great. But the problem with it is when you're lighting up a pathway, your iPhone doesn't give you a whole lot of light. So I kind of had a choice. Brendan and Brian were a little ahead of me, and I could keep my eye on them, or I could watch how not to die walking down that hill. So you can imagine what I chose. And I turned on my flashlight and just kept it at my feet so that I could see what the right next step was going to be. Standing there, I realized something. Light is rarely about visibility in every direction, right? When it's daytime, we don't think about these things. Just everything's lit up and you feel very safe and you do whatever you need to do, and that's part of it. The light isn't a part of our mind, but as soon as it gets dark, I realize that light is about orientation. It helps us know where we are and how to move forward. I think this is what Jesus is talking about when he says that you are the light of the world. He's not talking about illuminating everything. He's not asking us to solve the darkness problem completely. He's inviting us to offer enough light for somebody else to take the next right step. And Advent reminds us that frequently God does not flood the world with light, but God places it carefully, intimately into our human lives. And when we carry it, and when we hold it up, we make movement possible for one another, even in the darkest moments of our lives. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus stands before a crowd of ordinary people. Fishermen, farmers, widows, laborers, And he tells them that you are the light of the world, a city on a hill. These words are breathtaking in their simplicity because he's not speaking to those who are powerful or perfect. In fact, he's speaking to people who are under empire. They're being controlled by a whole other group of people who hold the power. And you can imagine how they felt that day and every other day. These are people who are not even sure how their light could possibly even matter. And then he says, you are the light. You bring out the God colors of the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you a light bearer, Jesus says, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. And now that I've put you on that hilltop as a light stand, shine. And then he takes it even further. What does shining means? It means keep an open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, Jesus says, you're going to prompt people to open up to God, the generous Father in heaven. In other words, the light that we are waiting for is the light that Jesus shares we already carry. So Advent isn't only about waiting for Christ to come, it's remembering and awakening to the fact that Christ is already in us. No matter how insignificant or how much darkness we feel that we're setting in, each of us refract the light in a variety of colors. That's one of my favorite parts about the Message translation here, that we're lighting the God colors to the world. The world needs the colors that only you can bring. Tammy shines a very different color than I do. Tammy was born to care for people. She exudes care even when she's not trying. You'll watch her with a group of kids and she parents all of them. Heather shines a very different God color than I do. Each of you shine a very different God color. And what Christ is saying to that crowd and to us is that the world needs the color of God as it is refracted through your being, who you are. So when we live with open hearts, when we keep an open house, when we're generous with our lives, we help others see the very nature of God. This is the miracle of Advent light. It spreads, it multiplies, it intensifies, and it shifts colors for those who need it. It reveals the God who has actually been here all along, waiting to be seen through us. Light is not a commodity that God dispenses from afar. It's the very essence of God's divine presence that was woven into all things throughout all of creation. That same light that spoke the cosmos into being still pulses through us and all of creation. In every act of love, in every moment of courage, in every spark of compassion. To bear this light is not to pretend like we own it or possess it, but it's to participate in the light. To recognize that that divine glow moves through us as goodness and hope for our world. Catherine Keller, a theologian, writes it this way. She says, God's creative power is not domination, but persuasion. A gentle, patient lure toward beauty and wholeness. So bearing the light means that we're aligning ourselves with God's persuasion. It means becoming more and more transparent, enough that God's light can shine God's colors into our world. When Jesus calls us the light of the world, he's describing what happens when human beings live in a conscious relationship with God. And yet, I don't know about you, but sometimes shining is not always easy. Sometimes, like a lighthouse that got splashed with mud, my world and my light begins to be dampened by the things around me. And it requires that I get more vulnerable. And the light that shines within me exposes things. It's things that I need to work on and be with and sit with and think about. It reveals what is true both in my life and in the world, even when that truth makes us uncomfortable. So bearing the light means letting ourselves be seen, not as flawless, perfect examples. Not that you didn't already know this, but I'm not your perfect pastor. I'm far from it. But instead, we shine as honest witnesses of God's grace. I stand here by the grace of God alone, and you stand where you sit and in your place by the grace of God alone. And it means we're carrying the radiance of compassion into places that need it the most. We don't have to look very far to see this need for light in our world. We live in a time of deep fragmentation. The air feels heavy with outrage and exhaustion. The pace of life leaves little room for us to wonder. We often want to do things that make a difference, but feel trapped because we can't even think of the right thing to do. And in such a world like this, it can feel naive for us to talk about shining. But Jesus and Paul, as they write about the light, are not talking about optimism. They're talking about participating in the divine reality that is with us at all moments. It doesn't matter whether I know it or not. The light of God was woven into the fabric of my being. It's about how do I participate with that light that is within me. So think about people who have carried that light throughout history. People like Desmond Tutu, who refused to surrender joy even in the face of apartheid. Or people like Dorothy Day, who fed the hungry and built community around a shared table in some of the darkest moments of American history. Or Fred Rogers, who reminded generations that kindness can literally heal us. None of these people erased the darkness, but they revealed what was possible within it. And closer to home, think about the quiet lights among us. The teacher who stays late to listening to our struggling students or a parent. Or that teacher who gives a little extra grace to our kiddo who needs it. That volunteer who visits the homebound each week and drops off Meals on Wheels, but instead of just dropping it off and knocking the door and handing it and walking away, takes a moment for a conversation for somebody who feels really alone, and it might be the one conversation they have each day. Or the neighbor who notices when somebody's lights haven't been on in a while and goes and knocks and checks and makes sure everything is okay. These are lanterns of our time. They don't change the whole sky, but they do change the space around them. To bear the light of Christ is to trust that small goodness matters. It's to live as if every act of love contributes to the coming dawn. So when Paul later says, "Shine like the stars in our world. He's speaking to a community that's learning how to embody joy and humility in a culture of pride and competition and power. What Paul tells us is that our light is not our own brilliance, but it's instead the reflection of divine mercy reflected through our lives. This remains our call, to live as if God's light truly dwells in each of us, to practice mercy in our families, to speak peace in our workplaces, to cultivate joy even in tired weariness. Each of these becomes a way of bearing the light of God. So how do we do this? How do we live as light bearers in a world that feels sometimes really dim? I think the first thing we have to do is we have to stay connected to the source. A lantern without oil or a bulb without current cannot shine. Bearing light begins in prayer and connection and listening to the Spirit's pulse in our lives. It's tapping into the presence of Jesus every chance we get. When we center ourselves in God's presence, we remember that it's not our light we're producing. We're just transmitting. We're just letting it shine through. The second, I think, is one that's going to make us uncomfortable. Practice visibility. Some of us like to hide. We like to be the lamp under the bushel. It's more comfortable that way. Jesus says a city on a hill cannot be hidden, and we say, just watch. Right? We can build up walls and we can make sure that nobody can see the light. But he's calling us to embody light openly so that other people can find their way to the city of healing. And there are times when being visible is in itself love. It's also an act of resistance against a world who's pushing darkness in. So when we have kindness in public, when we stand up and say, no, you can't treat somebody that way, in the middle of the public square. That's God's light bursting through. When we show up for a mom who's trying to figure out how to push her groceries and push the baby cart and figure out how to catch her 2-year-old at the same time, that is light in our world. When we ask the person at Nordstrom Rack standing behind the counter after a line of 250 people how they're doing that day, and they look at you like you're crazy because why would you ever ask that question? That is light in our world. And third, we need to stay connected to each other. One of the things I learned on that walk with Brendan and Brian was when my light merged with their light, things got a lot more comfortable. The trail became clearer. I felt safer. We felt more connected. The church exists to amplify the light of Christ. We gather here each week not because we've forgotten who God is and need to be reminded. We gather here because we need to rekindle each other's flame. The week has been hard. We've been in darkness at work, in our homes, and in our lives, and we just need to come rally around that one presence that holds it all for us. And we look at each other and we say, I get that you may not have light today, but I have enough for you. Take some of mine. We remind ourselves of that every week, so we come together. And finally, we've got to move toward the darkness. Light in a well-lit space isn't enough. Our call through Christ is to take that light into the world. It exists for healing. We're called to bring this light to the broken, to the lonely, to the overlooked. This is how divine love moves in our world. Always outward, always toward the other. In fact, whenever you feel that space of, I'm not sure they deserve the light, that's when you double down and walk toward it. Because that's what it means to reflect Christ's light, not our own. So perhaps this week we might need to name the places that feel dark in our own lives. And then ask, what would it look like to bring light there? It might be a phone call. It might be a knock on a neighbor's door. It might be an apology. It might be an act of generosity. It might simply be offering your presence to somebody else in our world. Because to bear the light is to believe that there is no place or person that is beyond redemption. As we walked out of the Stanislaus River and down that crazy path, and I watched as my flashlight and Brendan's and Brian's joined, for that moment it was impossible to tell which light was whose, because they all became a part of something larger and brighter. And this is what happens when we bear light together. One small act of love joining another and another becomes a great movement of divine illumination in a world that is dark and hungry for light. The Christ light carried in each of our hearts becomes a constellation of grace in the world. So we echo what Paul says when he says, you are like stars in the heavens. He calls us shining stars. Jesus calls us a city on a hill, both describing the same truth, that God's presence takes form in us. Advent leads us here. From longing to awakening to bearing. We begin to see that the light we have been waiting for is the same light that God has been waiting to shine in and through us. And so we live into that truth. And our world begins to change. And the darkness, though it doesn't vanish, it no longer defines the story. And light spreads from candle to candle, from heart to heart, from life to life, until the whole sky glows with possibility. I grew up in Texas and Oklahoma, where when it gets icy, your parents hand you a backpack. And in that backpack are a few things. Saltine crackers, because if you're going to die, you might as well eat saltine crackers. A blanket, and a package of little candles. And I'll never forget the moment when my mom said, Rustin, if you ever drive off the road because of the ice and it's freezing outside, one of these candles can keep you alive for a week if it has to, because it produces just enough warmth in your car to keep you from freezing. Our world needs us to live as if we know these truths. To not just think about it in our head, but to hold in our heart that the very presence of God depends upon us not putting ourselves under a bucket, but choosing to shine. Please pray with me. God, we know that we come to this place and many of us have our own darkness that feels like it's smothering us. And so we're here today because we need more of your light. We need more